I'm John.
And I'm Meredith.
And this is No Talking in the Library, week before the Patrons Return edition. So how have you been spending your time lately?
I have been finishing abandoned series that I had started, and for whatever reason, I just stopped watching. So in the last couple of weeks, I finished The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which was a show I really enjoyed and then enjoyed less, so I don't feel strongly enough to enthuse about it or sort of do a brief analysis of it. More strongly, I feel about the other series that I finished, which is The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. And you've seen that, correct?
I have. I watched it and then I read the Shirley Jackson book on which it's based, which is kind of different. Well, say what you think about it and then
as John said, this is a series. Based is almost too strong of a word. It's really more inspired by Shirley Jackson's 1959 novel. And I honestly think that is for the best. I really liked, rather than trying to make like a strict page to screen adaptation of her book, which I think there have been. I think there's been at least 2 or 3 film adaptations.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Of this book. They used her book and the way she constructs narrative and her use of genre to create a series that, although plot-wise does not really resemble her book, feels so much like a Shirley Jackson work. And that is really, I think, a remarkable success. The series on Netflix is about the Crane family. And they are a family who flips houses. So the Hugh and Liv are the parents, and they go around buying houses, flipping them for profit in their goal to sort of build their dream house. And when the series starts, they have purchased Hill House, which has already at this point a reputation for the unexplainable. And the Cranes have how many kids? Steve, Shirley, 5. They have 5 kids.
Right.
And they move into this house, and some odd things start happening. The youngest 2 start seeing things, and the parents sort of chalk it up to childhood imagination. And then one night, a massive tragedy strikes, and Liv, the mother, dies. And the way that this series is structured is it goes back and forth between the 90s, when the family has this house, when the children are kids, to when they are adults grappling with yet another familial tragedy. And I really like that because it adds suspense to the narrative. It leaves you with a lot of questions. You're trying to figure out what happens, who knows what, and it builds that sort of feeling of the unknown. And the book, and that's sort of where the series and the book are similar. The book is a little bit different. It's about a professor or doctor who is studying the paranormal, Dr. Montague.
Montague, yep.
And he is trying to study the paranormal at Hill House. He puts a call out for others who are interested in learning or experiencing the paranormal to stay at Hill House. And then these people experience strange and unexplained phenomena. And that's what Shirley Jackson does so well. If anyone's ever read it, she is able to make the mundane horrifying, whether it's a house or a sugar bowl or a lottery or
Right.
something like that. She's able to take these things, these seemingly benign things, events, objects, and just instill them with pure terror. And what the show does well is mimic that without sort of attempting to just, you know, copy the plot of the book.
Yeah, one of the really great things about Shirley Jackson's writing is exactly that it's incredibly atmospheric, and she doesn't rely on she doesn't. I mean, one of the things that you really that I really remember about the book is that you don't really see the horrifying action.
Yeah,
it always happens.
That's it. Your imagination is so much worse.
Right, exactly. It's happened somewhere else, and then sort of people are coping with the consequences of it. I think the lottery is a little easier to make that transition with, but I mean, it's, you know, if you liked books like We've Always Lived in the Castle, and I mean, that's another book with just incredible atmosphere. The series was really great. It was one of those things that I stumbled onto looking for just something to kill some time, and it's just absolutely, it's really well acted. I think you're exactly right. It preserves that kind of, it doesn't feel like it has to sort of like these are the exact events in the book. What it does is preserve the atmosphere that Shirley Jackson created in the book, and I think that's really, you know, the creepiest aspect of the whole thing.
And there's just wonderful attention to detail. As you watch, for example, the first episode, which I think is one of the scariest episodes because you're not entirely sure what's going on or like how scary this is going to be. And, you know, there's this tense moment where something is outside of a door, you know, the handle's shaking. There's the people inside are really concerned about what's happening in the hallway, and just behind them both is a ghost. Like, the show just has faces and just strange things tucked in the background, and people do not acknowledge it at all, but like, it's there, and it makes it even more terrifying because it's like, why don't you I see it, why don't you acknowledge what's happening? And it just makes it all the more terrifying.
Right. It's like you're in on a secret that they're not in on, and that makes it all the more alarming, just in general terms of the atmosphere over and above the actual events that are happening.
But it's I highly recommend it. I think, as John mentioned, I think the strength of the acting really elevates some of, I think I've read some criticism about the end, the way the series ends with almost too upbeat, sort of happy ending.
Right.
But I don't necessarily agree. A lot of horrible things happened to get to that point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing the same. I've been kind of going back through movies and things that I've seen before to kind of reevaluate them. And on a somewhat similar line, I rewatched the 1999 Martin Scorsese movie, Bringing Out the Dead. It stars Nicolas Cage, also has Patricia Arquette, John Goodman, Ving Rhames is in it. It's not one of Scorsese's better liked pictures. I'm not like a gigantic Scorsese fan, although, you know, Raging Bull I think was a great movie, and you know, a lot of his movies are obviously very good, but I'm not one of these people who are really obsessed with Scorsese movies. But Bringing Out the Dead is about ambulance drivers, EMTs, and Nicolas Cage plays an EMT who's sort of haunted by ghosts of people he was unable to save. There's a very sort of creepy element to it. So in the beginning, he tries to save Patricia Arquette's father, with whom she's had a very fraught relationship, and then he gets into this relationship with Patricia Arquette, which proves to be much weirder than he expected, and goes off in some very odd directions. But the reason why it's sort of seemed like an appropriate thing to talk about along with Haunting of Hill House is just there's this very uncanny dimension to it that's built onto the not entirely normal activity of what EMTs do. I mean, EMTs are constantly going into difficult situations or chaotic situations or tragic situations. But it kind of shows this sort of corona of feelings and anguish and just the uncanny that goes along with being the kind of person who's around a lot of the time when people die or when people have just died, and trying to sort of come to terms with what that means for you and how you're supposed to relate to the people around it, and it's it's clear that it's affecting him very profoundly. But it's really interesting to see the different ways that the different people on the EMT crew respond to the kinds of situations that they get put in.
That's an interesting comparison because, as you know, if you have watched The Haunting of Hill House, although you see like ghosts, I think that there is a lot of room for interpretation to suggest that what is haunting the family is psychological traumas, mental illness, just a whole bevy of other guilt, those kind of things.
Right. That's the interesting thing about, it shares with the book too, that it's not entirely clear that the ghosts are the thing, actually, that, not to drop any spoilers, but,
Right.
And I won't, but one of the things that, in the book, there really develops some question about what actually the central element of the plot was. You can never be the way she leaves it at the end. You're just not, she doesn't resolve it for you, and you're free to think, maybe it was one, or maybe it was the other, or maybe it was both.
And that's just one of the most wonderful things about her writing and her books is just, you're just left completely unsettled and, in a state of horror.
Right. Yeah. And the same way that, so an interesting thing about Bringing Out the Dead, just to return to that for a minute, is I'm not like a huge Nicolas Cage fan either. I've seen him in some things that I kind of enjoyed. I really enjoyed National Treasure, actually, even though people really hate on that movie, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But I always find his acting to be, he has this, it's like Nicolas Cage is playing Nicolas Cage in every movie that he's in. And in a weird way, the same could be said of Patricia Arquette. The character that she plays in this movie is different from the character that she plays in Medium, in the sense that she's not a suburban housewife. But there's a real commonality to her acting method that for that reason, a lot of times I'm not quite sold on the character she plays. Although I think in Medium she's very convincing as a suburban housewife. But this is one of the few Nicolas Cage movies that I saw where he really seemed to kind of submerge himself in the part. And it's really all about how it is that the EMTs relate to other people. So there's a really funny scene this is the thing about this movie too, is it's kind of horrifying, but it's also kind of funny. And there's a really great scene where they go into a club, and one of the sort of musicians has overdosed on heroin, and he's with Ving Rhames, and Ving Rhames has this sort of televangelist thing going on, and while Nicolas Cage is giving the guy the Narcan, he's sort of staging a kind of revival meeting, but it turns out that the guy's name is I.B. Bangin', and so he's trying to work in I.B. Bangin' into his carnival some sort of faith healer. It's really funny and really entertaining. But the funniness contributes to the horrifyingness, because you then wonder, like, what is that person's life and psyche about, such that that's the way that they choose to kind of create a barrier between themselves and the horror that they're living through. And that, once again, there's a kind of supernatural dimension to this movie, but it's entirely unclear whether the supernatural thing is the thing that's moving it along, or whether it's just the sort of unhinged aspect of the actual situation that they're in. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna follow up with anything else that we've watched or listened to or read. Right.
Well, I'm just to change gears. So I've had a lot of free time. My wife and I decided we were going to get this board game called Twilight Struggle, which it later turned out that you had played too. I'm a little surprised by this, but that's great.
I had a friend who was very into the Cold War.
Right. It's a really interesting game. It's for two people. It's a little spendy. I think it's about $60, but and it's really complicated. So you're going to spend 3 to 6 hours probably playing it. My wife and I both have PhDs in the history of the Cold War, essentially. So it really worked for us. But the reason I mention this is because it reminded me that the library has board games, and some really great ones, including this one. I'm just going to flash up the camera. Munchkin. This is one of my absolute favorite board games. It's a little bit of a sort of it appeals, I think, in the first instance to people who've done like tabletop role-playing games, but it's basically a really fun game. It's developed by the famous game designer Steve Jackson. If you're interested in finding out a little bit about it, Will Wheaton, who played Wesley Crusher on Star Trek The Next Generation, has a series called Tabletop. He's a very avid board gamer, and he gets people on to play board games. And there's an episode, all of the episodes are on YouTube. There's an episode of this in which he gets people together to play this, one of whom is Steve Jackson, the game designer himself, one of whom is Felicia Day, who does a bunch of web series and is involved in, I think The Guild's the main one that people think of. But in any case, and it's really great. They have a lot of fun playing the game, and they also sort of show you how you play the game and what it's all about. The library has a whole bunch of really interesting games. They have Catan, which is a great game that's not too complicated to play. They have Ticket to Ride, which is on a sort of similar theory, but...
Do we have Pandemic?
We do have Pandemic. Pandemic, it's funny, I went over to the show for the Games Hour. I was like, holy cow, really, like, on the one hand, Pandemic is, have you ever played Pandemic?
Yeah, Pandemic is actually I'm not the biggest board game fan because I'm a little competitive and
really?
I know, it's shocking. And for whatever reason, board games, like strategy, that kind of thing just is not one of my strengths. And I think I like Catan. I find Catan a little boring because all you do is roll dice and collect resources. But I like Pandemic because you are playing with, the players are all on the same team, and like the pandemic outbreak is what you're playing. You're playing against the board game.
Right.
And I think that's such a unique way of structuring a game, and I like being able to play with people rather than against friends and stuff like that. So I know it's a little grim to suggest Pandemic during a pandemic, but it's really fun.
Right, it's a little topical. For those of you out there who've never hung around with Meredith, we played Cards Against Humanity one night, and she got super competitive at that. And also, this is one reason why, in the nature of our friendship, is that, like, I also am a bit of a jerk in terms of being competitive. So it meshes in weird ways. This is, we do the floats for the parade for the library, and we're all about winning, which is maybe not in the spirit of it, but there you go. Anyway, but yeah, Pandemic is a great game for exactly that reason. It's really, it's collaborative. It's one of those games that there's a lot of ways to lose.
Yeah, it's really, really easy to lose, which again, I kind of like because it makes it's hard and you all lose together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've played it maybe like 10 times, and I think we've won the game like one time. It just gets obscenely difficult, but in a fun way. I mean, it's really there's a really great Will Wheaton tabletop episode about pandemic. If you're interested in seeing what it's all about. Once again, okay, a little topical for the moment, and obviously we certainly don't want to make light of what's going on in the world these days. But it's a great game, and maybe a way of sort of blowing off some steam or displacing some of the distressing features of what's going on right now. Anyway,
many other board games that we encourage you to check out and enjoy.
We do, and once again, this is something that's available to circulate. In case you're wondering, they're extremely scrupulous about cleaning them between uses, so it's definitely safe to circulate from us. But a lot of fun. I really recommend Munchkin because you can learn it in about 10 minutes, and every game is kind of different. It can work. There's some collaborative elements. It's mostly, but you can also really mess with people. It's one of those games where you really have the opportunity to take it out of the people you're playing with, which as a competitive jerk, I sort of enjoy. So.
Anything else?
I think that may be it for this time around, but check back next week and we'll have more things that we're watching, more things that we're doing.
All right, until next time.
All right.